I worked security for a while, mostly night shifts, at this massive, sprawling industrial park on the absolute outskirts of the city. Titan Industrial Complex, it was called, a rather grand name for what it had become. Most of the original titans of industry had long since moved out or gone bust, leaving their decaying husks behind. A good two-thirds of the warehouses and factory buildings were empty, padlocked, their windows broken, slowly falling into disrepair. It made for a pretty spooky patrol route, let me tell you. Just me, my beat-up company flashlight that was never bright enough, and miles of dark, echoing, empty buildings, with the wind whistling through broken panes of glass and rattling. Loose sheets of corrugated metal like an angry spirit. You hear things in a place like that all the time. Every old abandoned building has its stories, right? This one was no different. There was talk among the older guards, the ones who'd been there for years, of a night watchman who supposedly disappeared without a trace back in the 70s, his lunch still on his desk. Or whispers about illegal dumping, even bodies, in the more remote, overgrown sections of the park, near the old quarry. I tried not to think about that stuff too much when I was out there alone. My job was basically to drive around in a rattling, equally beat-up pickup truck, check a few key perimeter fences and main gates, make sure no kids were out there vandalizing the place or homeless folks trying to squat in the empty, dangerous buildings. Most nights, it was dead boring, mind-numbingly so, until I started seeing him. The first time I was doing my 2 aim check of the Delta Zone, the oldest, most derelict, and frankly creepiest part of the entire complex. My headlights cut a swath through the inky darkness, illuminating a long, windowless, graffiti-covered brick wall of a warehouse that had probably been empty for 20 years or more. And just for a second, caught in the sweep of my lights as I turned a corner, I saw a figure, tall, dressed in dark, shapeless clothing that blended with the shadows, standing absolutely still by a rusted-out, collapsed loading dock. Then, as I instinctively focused my main beam on him, he just melted back into the deeper shadows, gone as if he'd never been there. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding a little on the loose gravel. I got out, heart pounding, showing my heavy maglite around, its beam seeming pathetically weak in the vast darkness. Nothing, just crumbling brickwork. Weeds pushing through cracked concrete, the pervasive smell of damp, decay, and something else, something faintly chemical. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a shadow thrown by a swaying tree branch, my tired eyes playing games on me after hours of staring into the dark. But I saw him again a few nights later in a completely different section of the park near the old, fenced-off chemical storage tanks. This time, he was moving a slow, loping, almost unnatural gait, disappearing between 2 massive, dark, silent buildings. Again, tall, dark clothes, head down or hooded, never showing a clear face. I tried calling out, my voice sounding ridiculously small in the echoing emptiness. "Hey, security, stop right there. Identify yourself." He didn't even break stride, didn't look back, just vanished into the labyrinth of decaying, shadowed structures. It became a regular, unnerving thing, maybe once or twice a week, always in the dead of night. I'd catch a fleeting glimpse of this figure, always at a distance, always in the most deserted, run-down parts of the complex, always vanishing before I could get a clear look or a coherent response. He never seemed to be doing anything overtly destructive, not breaking in, not vandalizing, not carrying anything obvious. Just being there, watching, maybe. It was incredibly unnerving. The park was huge, mostly fenced, and supposed to be secure, at least from casual trespassers. How was he getting in and out so easily, so silently? And what in God's name was he doing out there night after night? I reported it to my supervisor, a lazy, overweight guy named Henderson, who mostly stayed in the main security office at the front gate, watching TV or playing games on his phone. Yeah, here, he said, without much interest, not even looking up. Probably just some homeless guy looking for shelter or kids daring each other to go into the spooky parts. Long as he's not causing any actual trouble, setting fires or anything, don't worry too much about it. Just log it in the report if you see him. Standard Henderson response. But this didn't feel like a homeless person simply seeking shelter or kids out for a thrill. There was an intent, a stealth, a purpose to his movements that was different, more unsettling. And the consistency of his appearance, always in the darkest, most remote, most dangerous areas. It felt like he belonged there, like he knew the complex, its hidden paths and shadows better than I did. He old, half-forgotten stories about the disappeared watchman from the 70s. About bad things happening in the forgotten corners of the Delta Zone started to feel a little less like harmless stories and a lot more like plausible history. The offense, if one was occurring, was trespassing at the very least. But my gut, honed by long, lonely nights in that place, told me it was more than that. Was he scouting for a future burglary of one of the few remaining active businesses? Using the deserted park as a meeting place for something illicit, something that needed the cover of darkness and desolation? Or was he something else entirely, something tied to the park's darker, whispered history? The not knowing the ambiguity was the worst part. I started carrying a heavier, longer flashlight, and I made sure the old, unreliable can of pepper spray they gave us was easily accessible in my belt. My patrols became less about checking locks and perimeter fences and more about scanning the deep shadows. My nerves constantly on edge, jumping at every unexplained sound. Every gust of wind rattling a loose shutter sounded like him approaching. Every shadow, every pile of debris seemed to take on his tall, dark, menacing shape. One night, after a particularly unnerving near sighting where he seemed to be watching me from the darkened window of an abandoned upper floor, I decided I'd had enough of being spooked, of feeling like prey. I saw him again, a fleeting glimpse, near the crumbling perimeter fence of the Delta Zone, a section where the fence was old and rusty, full of holes, an easy way in or out. This time, instead of just shining my truck spotlight and calling out uselessly, I cut my truck engine some distance away, grabbed my powerful mag light, and went after him on foot, trying to be as quiet as possible, moving from shadow to shadow. I wanted to see his face, to know who or what I was dealing with once and for all. I tracked him, or what I thought was him, through a bewildering maze of crumbling outbuildings. Deeper and deeper into the forbidden Delta Zone than I usually ever went on my patrols. The silence here was absolute heavy, broken only by my own ragged breathing and the crunch of broken glass and debris under my boots. Then I lost him. He just vanished, as if the earth had swallowed him up. I stood there in the oppressive, suffocating darkness, surrounded by decaying, skeletal structures, feeling a profound sense of unease, of being completely out of my depth, of having made a very bad mistake. As I turned to head back to the relative safety of my truck, my flashlight beam, sweeping nervously across the ground, caught something glinting. It was a small, worn, leather-bound notebook, lying half-hidden under a pile of fallen bricks. It was damp, clearly been out in the elements for a while, but not ancient. I picked it up, my fingers trembling slightly. Inside, the pages were filled with cramped, spidery, almost illegible handwriting, and strange, disturbing, childlike sketches, crude drawings of the warehouses, of the fences, of figures. Stick figures, but with an unsettling, almost predatory quality to them. And dates. Lots and lots of dates. Going back months, some circled in red, some with cryptic single-word notes beside them like no activity, or subject cited, Sector G, or simply watched. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a homeless person's diary of foraging spots. This looked like surveillance logs. Someone was systematically, obsessively watching this industrial park or something, or someone within it. But who and why? Was I one of the subjects cited? Had this figure been watching me all along? I didn't take the notebook. I dropped it where I found it, as if it were burning my hand, suddenly feeling like I'd stumbled into something far bigger, far more dangerous, far more organized than I could possibly handle. I backed out of there fast, not even trying to be quiet anymore, just wanting to get away. I told Henderson about the notebook the next morning, trying to convey the seriousness of it. For once, he actually looked concerned, or at least less bored. He said he'd pass it up the chain to corporate security. I don't know if he ever did, or if anything came of it. The figure, I saw him a couple more times after that, always at a distance, always vanishing. Then he just stopped appearing, or maybe I just stopped seeing him, stopped looking so hard. I quit that security job not long after. The pay wasn't worth the constant annoying fear, the feeling of being an unwitting participant in some unseen, unknown, sinister drama. I never found out who that figure was, or what he was really doing, or what was truly in that disturbing notebook. Maybe he was just a harmless eccentric with a strange, obsessive hobby. Or maybe he was part of something much darker, something that used the desolation and anonymity of that industrial park as its cover. The local stories about bad things happening there, about people disappearing, maybe they weren't just stories after all. Maybe they were warnings. And maybe, just maybe, that night watchman who disappeared back in the 70s had found a similar notebook, or seen something he shouldn't have too. It's a thought that still gives me chills on quiet nights. My friend Maria, she's a tough cookie, always has been. She worked her way through community college by taking on some pretty rough jobs, and one of them was the graveyard shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. at a 24-hour gas station and convenience store called Highway Haven. It was located on a fairly quiet state highway, about 5 miles out of our small town, kind of isolated. Especially after midnight when the local traffic died down to almost nothing. It was just the buzzing fluorescent lights, the hum of the coolers, and the occasional late-night trucker or partygoer stopping for gas and coffee. She heard the usual stories from other graveyard shift workers in town, tales of attempted robberies, weirdos hanging around, that kind of thing. But Maria was pretty good at handling herself, usually. This particular customer started showing up about a month into her working there. It was always the same car, an older model, dark green or maybe black sedan. Hard to tell under the yellowish station lights with heavily, illegally tinted windows, so you could never see who was inside. And it always arrived at the same odd hour, usually between 2:30 and 3 a.m. every 2 or 3 nights. The routine was always identical and deeply unsettling. The car would pull up to the furthest pump, the one least visible from the brightly lit store. The driver, or whoever was in there, would never get out. After a few minutes of just sitting there, engine off, lights off, they'd pay for a small, very specific amount of gas. Always exactly $7.50 worth. Never a penny more or less. Using a credit card slid quickly through the pay at the pump reader. They never came into the store, never bought anything else, never spoke to Maria. Even if she was outside sweeping the forecourt, after fueling they wouldn't just drive off. They'd often just sit there in the car engine still off for a long time. Sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes as long as half an hour. Just sitting in the dark. The tinted windows making it impossible to see if they were watching her or the station or the empty highway. It was incredibly creepy. Maria started to dread the appearance of that car. She'd get this cold knot in her stomach when she saw its familiar, shadowy outline pull in. She tried to be professional, to ignore it, but it was hard. What were they doing? Why that specific small amount of gas? Why the same time? Why just sit there in the dark? She mentioned it to her manager, a tired, overworked guy named Sal. Oh yeah, the quiet car, Sal said, surprisingly. Been coming around like that for a couple of months now, even before you started. Other night shifters have mentioned it. Probably just someone who lives nearby, likes to get out for a late night drive, maybe has insomnia. As long as they pay and don't cause trouble, it's not our problem. He clearly didn't see it as anything more than an oddity. But Maria felt it was more than just odd. There was an intelligence to it, a watchfulness that made her skin crawl. She started noticing other details. The license plate on the car was always caked in mud, or sometimes seemed to be partially obscured by a rag tucked into the bumper. The car itself, though old, was always immaculately clean on the outside, which was weird given the muddy plate. The offense here was subtle, but the psychological impact was significant. Maria felt like she was under surveillance, but for what purpose? Was the car being used as a discreet drop-off or pickup point for something illegal? Right there at the gas station, using the small regular gas purchase as a cover for their presence? Were they timing police patrols or observing the station's security, or lack thereof, for a potential robbery? Or even more personally disturbing, was this person or people fixated on her, the lone female attendant on the graveyard shift? That was the thought that really terrified her. She started taking notes. Dates, times, how long the car stayed. She tried to get a look at the driver, but the tint was too dark, and they never once made eye contact or even turned their head in a way that would reveal a profile. It was like being watched by a ghost in a machine. One night, the car pulled in, did its usual $7.50 fuel up, and then, instead of just sitting there, the driver's side door opened a crack. Maria, who was inside the store behind the counter, froze, her heart pounding. Was this it? Were they finally going to do something? But no one got out. The door just stayed ajar for a few minutes, then closed again. The car sat there for another 10 minutes, then silently drove off into the night. What was that about? A signal? A test? Maria told her friends, including me, about it. We were worried for her. You need to report this to the police, Maria, I urged. Even if they can't do anything immediately, at least there's a record if something does happen. She was hesitant. Report what? A car that buys gas and sits in the parking lot? They'll think I'm nuts or just a scared girl on the night shift. That's the problem with these kinds of situations, isn't it? The perpetrators are so good at staying just on the right side of any obvious lawbreaking, while still managing to terrorize you. The situation resolved itself in a way Maria never expected. One morning, Sal, her manager, called her in. Good news, he said. You don't have to worry about the quiet car anymore. Police picked him up last night, about 20 miles down the highway. Turns out they were using our station and a few others like it as drop points. Small-time drug runners, apparently. The driver would leave a package under the car for someone else to pick up later, or vice versa. The $7.50 was just their signal amount, and sitting there was them waiting for the exchange or the all clear. Someone finally tipped off the cops about their route. Maria was floored and immensely relieved. Her instincts had been right all along. It wasn't just an eccentric local. It was actual organized wrongdoing happening right under her nose. Using her and her quiet gas station as an unwitting part of their operation. When she told her friends who'd previously dismissed her fears, they were a bit sheepish. Wow, guess you're right to be creeped out, one admitted. It was a small vindication, but the weeks of anxiety, of feeling watched and vulnerable, had taken their toll. It just goes to show, even in the most mundane, everyday jobs, like pumping gas and selling lottery tickets on the graveyard shift, you can find yourself on the very edge of a hidden criminal world, and sometimes that regular customer who gives you the creeps. They might have a very good, very legal reason for their strange behavior. It makes you wonder what else is going on, just out of sight in the quiet corners of the night. This one's about a guy I knew from a temp agency. Name was Kevin. He picked up a lot of odd jobs, and for a few months he was working as a midnight janitor for a small independent advertising agency, Innovate Solutions, that occupied a couple of floors and a modern downtown office building. It was a solo gig from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., just him and the empty, silent offices. His job was straightforward. Empty trash, vacuum carpets, wipe down surfaces, make sure the place was presentable for the next business day. Pretty standard, if lonely, work. The agency, Innovate Solutions, was one of those trendy, open-plan places with lots of glass walls, quirky modern art, and a generally high-stress vibe, even when empty. Kevin said you could almost feel the leftover tension in the air. He usually started on the upper floor, where the main executive offices were, and worked his way down. One night, or rather very early morning, around 3 a.m., he was cleaning the main conference room on the executive floor. This room had a huge, polished mahogany table and a floor-to-ceiling glass wall that overlooked the city. As he was vacuuming, he noticed something odd under the massive table, near the end where the CEO usually sat. It was dark, a stain on the light beige carpet. He bent down for a closer look. It was still wet, and it was red, a deep crimson red. His first thought was spilled red wine from a late-night meeting. But as he looked closer, his blood ran cold. The stain was too thick, too coppery smelling, even through his cleaning solution fumes. And there were a few smaller, splattered droplets leading away from the main stain towards the private elevator that went directly to the CEO's penthouse apartment in the same building. Kevin wasn't a forensics expert, but he'd watched enough TV shows to know that this looked a hell of a lot like a significant amount of blood, and it looked fresh. His heart started hammering. What had happened here? An accident? A fight? Something worse? The office had been empty when he arrived, or so he thought. He hadn't heard anything out of the ordinary. He immediately thought about calling the police, but then a wave of fear and a more cynical thought washed over him. He was a temp worker, a night janitor. If he called the cops and it turned out to be, say, a massive red wine spill from a clandestine late-night executive party, he'd look like an idiot, probably lose his job. And what if it was something serious? Would they believe him? Or would they suspect him of something, the only person officially in the building at that hour? He was torn. He paced the conference room, his mind racing. Then he made a decision he'd regret for a long time. He decided to just clean it up. He told himself it was probably nothing, just a spill. He got his most powerful carpet stain remover, his industrial wetback, and he went to work. It took him nearly an hour scrubbing, vacuuming, scrubbing again. By the time he was done, the stain was mostly gone, just a faint, almost invisible discoloration on the carpet if you knew exactly where to look. The coppery smell still lingered faintly, though. He finished the rest of his shift in a daze, constantly looking over his shoulder, jumping at every little sound. He didn't see anyone, didn't hear anything else out of the ordinary. The next night, he went to work with a knot of dread in his stomach. He half expected the police to be there, or for the CEO, a notoriously volatile man named Mr. Sterling, to confront him. Nothing. The office was normal. The faint discoloration under the conference table was still there, but no one else would ever notice it unless they were on their hands and knees. Mr. Sterling was in his office, looking a bit more stressed and pale than usual, but otherwise acting normally. Kevin never said anything to anyone about what he'd found and cleaned. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had tampered with evidence, that he had covered up something terrible. The crime here was whatever had caused that bloodstain. But his own actions, born of fear and self-preservation, felt like an accessory after the fact. A few weeks later, Kevin heard through the office grapevine that Mr. Sterling's difficult business partner, a man known for his aggressive tactics and shady connections, had suddenly and unexpectedly resigned and moved abroad for health reasons. There were no official announcements, no farewell parties. He just vanished from the company. Kevin never knew for sure if there was a connection between the bloodstain under the conference table and the business partner. A sudden departure. Maybe the partner had a really bad nosebleed during a late night argument with Sterling. Maybe it was just a massive, clumsy red wine spill after all, and the partner's resignation was a complete coincidence. But Kevin didn't believe in coincidences like that. He was convinced he had cleaned up the aftermath of something violent, something criminal, that had happened in that silent, empty office in the dead of night. And the knowledge of it, the fear that he could have been discovered, or that he had inadvertently helped a powerful man get away with something terrible, haunted him. He quit that janitorial job not long after, found something working days in a place with more people around. He told me this story years later, over a beer, his voice still a little shaky when he talked about it. He said the worst part wasn't even the fear of what might have happened to him, but the gnawing guilt and the chilling realization that sometimes the most ordinary jobs can make you an unwilling witness or even a reluctant accomplice to the darkest secrets of the people who sign your paychecks. And that sometimes the most effective way to make a problem disappear is to just have the night cleaner take care of it. No questions asked. It makes you wonder what else gets quietly mopped up and vacuumed away in those empty office buildings after everyone else has gone home.